A couple of good French films there. Put them in your diary. Want to go and see at some point. Now we go to the international newspapers. James Creedon with me here in the studio, and you're starting off with an intriguing title from the New York Times.
That's right. It's usually droit du seigneur, sort of the Lord's right or will. Droit du dirty old men, says Stephen Clark, writing for the New York Times. He's actually often on our set here at Fast 24, author of A Year in the Merd. Anyway, he's saying that the sight of a top French establishment figure, this of course is still about Dominique Strauss-Kahn, coverage all over. The sight of a top French establishment figure being treated like an ordinary criminal is about as rare as a photo of the Queen of England in a bikini. Now, we'll get to the Queen later, and we can assure you she ain't in a bikini. Basically, what he's saying is that this is just very rare in France, a country where the elite is as strong as ever, even post-revolutionary France. All it did was put in an even stronger elite, according to Stephen Clark. There's a thin line between sexual impunity and legal impunity, and basically he goes on to say that he thinks even if Dominique Strauss-Kahn were convicted and served time, he'd still come back to France, possibly serve as a minister, write an autobiography, which would then be adapted by Roman Polanski. So he's being very tongue-in-cheek indeed.
Okay, I don't wonder if he's in tomorrow, because he's at Friday. He's usually
right.
here, Stephen. So.
Who knows what kind of reception he'd get after that?
Exactly.
French bashing. Now, Le Monde is actually talking about the Roman Polanski affair, as it's known. This is a French-Polish film director who, in 1978, fled the US, having been charged with raping, with the statutory rape of a 13-year-old girl. He never went back. There are no extradition agreements between France and the US, and Le Monde quotes one US-based French lawyer who says, "We're paying for the Polanski affair." In other words, there is a parallel being drawn between his fleeing of France at the time and Dominique Strauss-Kahn's possible whether or not he would have fled. Other comparisons in the papers with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, this came out yesterday, that he had a child with his housekeeper some 10 years ago, and it was the reason for his recent breakup with Maria Shriver. So in the Washington Post, they're saying between Strauss-Kahn and Schwarzenegger, you'd think it's the 1960s or the 1860s with this sort of behaviour. We'll move to ProPublica. Now, this is an interesting piece by a journalist called Tracy Weber. Now, about 8 years ago, she was asked to investigate into several allegations that Arnold Schwarzenegger had been involved in groping people all over Southern California. It became an article that was published in the Los Angeles Times shortly before he was elected as the governor of California. Yeah. Now, what happened? You would expect that there would be a lot of outrage. Well, no. People were very critical of the Los Angeles Times for coming out with this story at that time, and thousands of people cancelled their subscriptions. Now, Tracy Weber says it was devastating for her as a journalist, devastating for the women who had shared their stories, and also she says if the press had investigated and reported on the past allegations against Dominique Strauss-Kahn, would it have mattered? Sure. That's a very different point of view to what we're normally getting in the US press. Yeah. She's saying, well, what would it have changed if the French papers had been more, investigative?
It's intriguing to get these slightly different angles coming out on these stories as the story goes on. Something else you pulled out from the Daily Beast.
That's right. Now, this was an article yesterday by Bernard-Henri Lévy, famous French philosopher. Now, he vigorously defended Dominique Strauss-Kahn and was very critical of people like Tristan Banon, a woman in France who came out with allegations dating back to 2002, critical of the American justice system, just a very critical piece. Now, he is being lambasted in the American press this morning. Let's have a look at Salon.com. Dominique Strauss-Kahn's shameless defender, they call him. The New Yorker, for their part, is talking about Arnold Schwarzenegger, Bernard-Henri Lévy and Dominique Strauss-Kahn. They're particularly critical of one line by Bernard-Henri Lévy. He says that basically when Dominique Strauss-Kahn was sent out in front of the cameras, it was as if he was a subject of justice like any other. And the New Yorker says, it's enough to make you want to get on a rocket to outer space. Isn't equal justice for all one of those things we all agreed on? So he's getting a roasting in the American papers this morning. Now, I'll just quickly show up these at the end, because Britain and Ireland are talking about one thing and one thing only: one small step for the Queen and a giant stride into history. Now, interestingly, The Independent has exactly the same headline: one small step for a monarch. 100 years since a British monarch had stepped foot in Ireland. So there's the Queen's foot in Dublin. Just can I very quickly show the Irish Independent, which is also leading on this. If we have the Irish Independent very quickly, a moment of healing, and that's at Dublin's Garden of Remembrance. I don't know if we have that, but obviously on the front page of the Irish papers as well this morning.
All right, James, thank you very much. Close to his heart with that accent.
Indeed.
All right, James. Thank you very much, James Creedon, with the international newspapers this morning. Let's have a look at the headlines then on France 24, suicide watch and a